I think. Brilliant. So here we are, part 2. Who was here for part 1 in July? And who remembers what I said? So what we'll do is we'll just have a quick skim through it, if I can work my digit here. Oh, brilliant, technology works. I don't know if you can read that. But basically, we spent a lot of time, although we're looking at the life of David, we spent a lot of time looking at the life of Samuel, because Samuel was the last of the prophets who anointed the first 2 kings of Israel. And, you know, it was quite important to look at this. Yeah. Sorry. In my notes. So basically, when the people of Israel went to Samuel, they said, look, we want a king because all our neighbours have kings. And it's like, okay. Samuel wasn't too impressed and he said, look, the Lord your God is your king. Is that not enough? You know. And then Samuel said, okay, but you remember if you have a king, you have all these bad things that are going to happen to you, X, Y, and Z. You're going to have to pay 10% to your king. You're going to have to serve him. You're going to have to serve in his army. You're going to have to do all these things. It's not going to be good for your country. But they said, no, we want our king. And, you know, Samuel said, okay. He felt really rejected by the people of Israel. But he was speaking to God, and God said, look, it's not you they're rejecting, it's me. But surprisingly, God agrees, just let the people of Israel have their king. And he did. And this is how we get to anointing David and Saul. Now, I found it quite interesting that when we go to anoint them, there's animals involved. Because Samuel finds Saul looking for his donkeys. If you imagine yourself out looking for your donkeys, and you come across a man who anoints you as the king of Israel and gives you a prophetic word that your donkeys are okay, and then you go home, what a day that is for you. And the same with David. And there's a real lesson to be learned from David's anointing. When Samuel went to David's household, so that was the household of Jesse, David's father, he was led there by God to kind of look for the next king after Saul. And there's reasons why Saul was replaced by David. And then basically what he found was Jesse paraded all these handsome, wonderful, good-looking men in front of him, but he was getting nothing from God. And then so basically Samuel said, do you have any other sons? He said, oh yes, there's only poor David. He's out tending the flock. Well, can we see David? And then obviously he is a man after God's own heart, and he was anointed as king. But the lesson from that, and it's a good takeaway from the first part, was, you know, even if the world thinks you're least, actually God thinks you're most, you know. And it says in Matthew, you know, who is least is most, and who is most is least. And that's an important lesson. You know, it doesn't matter what the world says to you or thinks about you. You know that God thinks that way of you. So, then we are. And just to sum up, basically, this is what somebody wrote about Samuel, and it's very apt. He's very faithful, like David. The life of Samuel is a beautiful testimony to the faithfulness of God's calling and purpose. Through ups and downs, he remains steadfast. His faithfulness reminds us that God cherishes our commitment and dedication no matter the circumstances that we face. Let's reflect on how we too can be faithful stewards of what God has entrusted into us, living out our faith with integrity like Samuel did. You know, and basically, the next slide just shows, it's basically why Saul was replaced by David, and it was because it wasn't that they were indifferent, they all both sinned, but it was the reaction to that sin. It's basically that Saul tried to cover it up. He was very human, very worldly in his reactions, whereas David was like, yeah, even though I've committed these sins, I slept with Bathsheba, I sent her husband to the front line to basically be killed. He actually said to God, I'm sorry. And that was the difference between the two. He was a man after God's heart. So that leaves us to today. I was trying to do the quick version there through the kids, like the kids' message, but it didn't really, don't know if I got there. So this is where we're going today. A quick look at through the life of, why we're looking at the life of David, and then an overview of the David versus Goliath, and then a couple of points and lessons. So, some more reasons to look at David. Basically, very simply, other than Jesus, he occupies most of the Bible. David's reign was seen as a real high spot in Israel's history. David is one of the greatest leaders ever that the world has seen. And David plays an important part in the family line of Jesus, and he is a man of God's own heart. And then we can go on to, so we're going to get the scene. So Goliath, as we know, is termed as a giant. I couldn't actually see the word giant in the Bible, but he is a giant. So he is nearly 3 meters tall, and that is described in the Bible as 6 cubits and a span. So a cubit is 18 inches, and a span is 9 inches. So that will just make it really simple for you, as I find. And his armour weighs 60 kilograms, and you can just imagine the size of this man. I mean, I'm quite tall, at just over 6 feet tall. So you think half of me again, with 60 kilos of armour on and a big spear on his back. Pretty fearsome. I would be running the other way. I would be with the Israelites. I'm not fighting this dude. I'm out of here. And that was. So he carries the largest spear that everyone has ever seen, and he's a one-man army. So basically, this is summed up in 1 Samuel 17, verse 4-7. It says, a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet, a coat of armour of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him, and goodness knows how big the shield was. He was the champion of the Philistine people. Now the situation here is, basically, nobody wanted to fight. Both sides of the Elah Valley, the Israelites on one side, the Philistines on the other side, and they would just shout abuse at each other all day and then set guard, but they don't want to fight. But basically, every morning and evening, Goliath would come out and challenge the Israelites to send out their champion to face him. And basically the point of this was, we don't want a bloodbath, but what we do is, we'll send out our champion, you send out yours, and whoever wins, wins the battle. So if the Israelites win, the Philistines have to serve them as slaves, and the other way around. If the Philistines win, the Israelites have to be the slaves of the Philistine people. So then you can imagine the excitement as a young boy arrives at the scene. His family are from Bethlehem, about 15 miles away. And you've got to remember that David goes to visit his brothers to give them food from their father. And, you know, it's a 15-mile trek each way, and he's going back to look after the flock in between times. So he's quite committed, and obviously a pretty fit guy. So one day arrives, and then Goliath issues this challenge. And you can imagine one effect, if you remember the description of the giant, this would have on people is they would be absolutely terrified. And, you know, day after day, they'd be so demoralised if this guy was coming out and being unchallenged day after day, insulting you, insulting your God, you know, just basically terrifying people. So the Israelites think that no one can beat this giant. And I'm thinking, well, they seem to be thinking in my head, in worldly terms, you know, where is God in this thought? Why are you thinking about human terms? Because if you're thinking about human terms, you're seeing a 9'9" giant, but you're not thinking in godly terms, in godly context. You know, And that makes you think another way. I mean, how many times in our lives, when we face the giants in our life, do we just not bring God to the situation? God has no problem defeating a giant like Goliath, but on our own, we have real problems and we can't do it. So Saul offers great wealth and his daughter's hand in marriage to anyone who can defeat Goliath. And then you can imagine the rumours in the camp. Somebody's accepted the challenge. And then a young boy, not even an enlisted soldier, with not a piece of armour and just a sling, walks out and says, "This is Yahweh's war." And then we kind of know what happens after that. David hits Goliath with a sling, stuns him, stabs him, and gruesomely cuts off his head. And that's it. So what can we learn from this encounter between David and Goliath? And this is a quote from Mother Teresa. Be faithful in small things, because it's the small things that strengthen us. David's very much was faithful in the small things. So if you look at 1 Samuel 17, verse 14 to 15, David was the youngest. The three oldest followed Saul. But David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So as I said, he's going 15 miles each way. So, small things make big differences. And here's a wee story. And this tells you actually how old the book was that I found this in. Okay, so I don't know if it's been done again since. Frenchman Jean-Claude Killy made a clean sweep of the men's alpine events in 1968 during the Winter Olympics. The point here being that he finished sometimes a second ahead, sometimes tenths of a second ahead, and that's a small difference, but it had a big effect. You know, as we see in the last verse, David also recognised the difference that small things can do. I mean, as a young man, he must have been super excited by, oh, there's this big battle, or something, my brother's at the front line, and everything's going to happen, but he still went ahead and looked after his dad's flock, because he realised that his father's sheep would still require care with his brother's weight. And remember, it was 15 miles away. So as Christians, we can tend to respond sometimes to the kind of larger ministry. I've done it myself, you know, the kind of Holy Brompton Trinity thing, Alpha, you know. It's easy to respond to the large, attractive ministries, making the day-to-day seem a bit mundane. It needs to be remembered that faithfulness to small tasks is important. And use an example. So, if you don't have a thumb, you remember you're a part of the body of the church, and if a small part of that church isn't there or doesn't function, you can try living without a thumb, but you probably wouldn't get very far in your day-to-day. It's just a thought. It's not only the glamorous things. It's like me, terrified of being up here. I'd actually rather be the guy in the background with Hoover and nobody knows what I'm doing and stuff like that. That's definitely who I am. But for some reason, I seem to be here. And I know who to blame for that, but that's fine. So, remember, and I found this quote, but I couldn't find anyone attributed to it, right? But I think it's absolutely great. Be faithful in small things is no small thing. Remember, the small things matter. It's like Linda handing me the clicker when I come in the door. It's people welcome you. Small things, but it makes big, big difference to people's experience and people's lives. Right. So, and that's kind of, I don't know, that's probably an over-representation, that picture of Goliath's height, but yeah, it is pretty big. So, David is willing and up for the fight. So in verses 17, 26, 36, 45, and you can read these, they're all in chapter 17. Remember, David has already been anointed the next king of Israel. So he's already started living out his calling, growing spiritually. And David resisted the temptation to run away from the giant. Now, as I said, if Goliath walks in here, I'm finding the exit somewhere around the back. But he has a determination about him. You know, he's not running away from the giant. He has the courage, and he has an absence of fear. It's probably more down to control of fear, because I think if you look at the Bible, it doesn't say, well, it says don't sin, be good, but it probably says fear not more. And that's a real thing. So fear not, but only not in the context of fearing God. You must fear God, but fearing God is a different context. It's reverent fear, it's respect, it's honour. And David faced this battle, but he'd already had previous experience. So basically God had kind of set him up for this challenge with Goliath. And we read in 32 to 34 that he definitely had past experiences that would help him. So he had an experience with a lion and a bear when he was out with his flock of sheep. And in Samuel 17, 32 to 37, it gives an account of this. So it says, David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he is a warrior from his youth. He has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep of the flock, I went after it, struck it, rescued the sheep from its mouth, and when it turned on me, seized it by the hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the land of the Philistine." And then Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." So the important lesson here is, like David, your past experiences in your life will help with the giants in your future. Remember the bears and the lions. Remember that you've had all these things in the past, and they can help you. God has helped you prepare you for the future, like it did David for his encounter with Goliath. And be true to yourself. This is an interesting one. So in 1 Samuel 6:17, 38 to 39, we read, "When Samuel dressed David in his own tunic, he put a coat of armour on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried to walk around because he was not used to them." Basically, Saul was trying to dress David in what he thought was appropriate armour and clothing for this battle ahead. So I've got another wee story. It doesn't involve skiing this time. So students in the American high school knew that Mr. Sullivan was a strict teacher, and he would send them out of the class for talking, so don't talk. But then one day, the LAPD kicked Mr. Sullivan out of the class. And it turns out that Mr. Sullivan was really Mr. Willie White, who had been impersonating Mr. Sullivan for 10 years. And basically, they only found out about this in America when the real Mr. Sullivan retired from a school 10 miles down the road. Nobody had I don't know what the record keeping is, but I don't think it would happen today. But basically, Mr. White had been impersonating Mr. Sullivan for around 10 years. Unbelievable. And that's like the best intentions of Saul. He tried to turn David into somebody that he wasn't, well, not quite yet at this point in his life. Remember, David was a shepherd boy, really good with a sling, but he wasn't a warrior king yet. At this point in his life, he was still a shepherd. He wasn't used to using armour and swords. He was used to slinging stones. And this is really the maturity of David. He decided, this get-up isn't for me. I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to use what I'm familiar with, comfortable in, and that's my sling and my stones. I mean, wisely, David did not pretend to be someone he wasn't. He used Saul's armour, and he wouldn't have been comfortable or skilled if he tried to use Saul's armour and sword. He decided to use not to use the armour and weapons of Saul. And it's like me, if I said to Morag or Colette, if she was here, you know what, you're going downtown Carluke tonight, why don't you wear my rags? They'd be like that. No, I don't think that suits me. You can imagine it. And that's what we're getting at here. You know, within the Christian faith, there's lots of men and women who have lived their lives gloriously for God. So I think of people like Hudson Taylor, D.L. Moody, C.H. Spurgeon, and all the kind of modern day evangelists. But, you know, we need to admire these people, but we also need to let God tell us how to use our unique gifts that we can contribute towards the kingdom. Don't try to be someone else. Try to be yourself. It's like social media. You see all these superstars are all rich, wealthy, got lots of cars and stuff. Well, actually, you are unique yourself. Try to be yourself. Be yourself and let Him make you the best you can be. The best person to be is yourself. And remember from 1 Samuel 16 verse 7, the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him." The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. There we go. It's the Lord's battle. You know, it's when David faced Goliath, you know, a seasoned, battle-hardened warrior, about twice his size, at least twice his size, from the picture we've seen. You know, he knew exactly where to place his faith, not in swords and spears, but in the power of God. He was very, very clear, very, very faithful man. David's skill would not be the deciding element, but the Lord Himself would decide the outcome of the battle. This is the Lord's fight. You know, our lives are full of giant challenges that we think are impossible, and they can dog and disturb our sleep. But when facing giants, it's comfortable to know, like David, the outcome doesn't depend on us. However, this does come with a bit of a caveat. We must be in obedience and play our part, using the skills and gifts that God has given us. Then we can be assured that God will be the one who determines the outcomes of our battles and our fights with the giants in our lives. We need to rest in the knowledge that the battle is the Lord's, and He is the one who decides the outcome. And you'll be glad to know you can wake up now because we've got to the end. So just a bit of a conclusion and summary. What can we say? David was an extraordinary boy, anointed, but not yet king of Israel or the leader. It was David's unwavering faith, relationship, and experience of God helped him through his previous experience with the lion and the bear. You know, that means that this could be reframed as God's victory. You know, we should be faithful, as we have learned, in the small things. We need to honour God, and God will honour you. And as David did, as we said, use past experience. And then remember, be true to yourself. And most importantly, the battle is the Lord's. And that is us. That is me. So, song, right? Perfect.